Feels we've entered this. Oh, someone forgot
Sorry.
to switch on. Sorry about that. Yeah, so, okay, it's a disruptive environment. You can either love it or hate it, but the real benefit in liking it and embracing it, the benefit of maintaining an optimistic mindset in the environment that we're faced with, because I think it's very easy to be swayed otherwise by alternative views. An observation, particularly with younger people, that there's a bit of reverse mentoring going on, that rather than it being older people mentoring younger people, that older generations are actually benefit from mentoring from young people. And this thought that a renaissance in justice, in that, from a justice perspective, things are changing. It's interesting that others touched on the working from home. We spoke about it. Certainly, from my perspective, it's been a challenge. It's a challenge for a lot of people. It's a challenge for business people. It's a challenge for employees, and it's a challenge that's already been articulated for students. I've observed amongst younger generations, and it's maybe just me being old and grumpy, that there is a sense of entitlement, whereas I think for our generations and our parents' and grandparents' generation, you probably had to work a bit harder for it. And the final comment was that, and whether it's out of COVID or not, but certainly it's what you see articulated in the papers, is I think values are under threat. And it's partially because we don't have good benchmarks. You know, you've seen the erosion of the importance of religion in the community, for example, and perhaps government and government leaders not providing quality, benchmarks in terms of values. I think that was most of what we covered.
That's great. Thanks, Michael. And let's move on to the fourth question, which was all about individual capabilities, skills and behaviours. Who are we hearing from there?
That will be me.
Thanks, John.
And because I've got the clock, I've probably got about 5 minutes. There's a theme running through each of what we've heard so far, and it continued in the discussion that we had, that Christine and I had. And she was talking about her organisation, talking about Headspace, saying COVID hit and it meant there was a complete change in the way they had to work. On top of COVID, of course, dealing with young people, there'd also been bushfires, floods, all sorts of disruptions impacted on the young people. And a lot of them were left to find their own way through it. So the work they did was having to work with the young people, but also having to work with people in the organisation and adapt. And there was a lot of trial and error internally being able to do that, because they could no longer talk to people face to face. Couldn't get to deliver your services face to face. You also weren't dealing face to face with the people in the organisation. So it became important to actually be able to try to do that a lot better. So everybody had to learn how to do that. And as you said, trial and error to get to where you want to get to. That it was a very different experience for some of the people who work in Headspace dealing remotely. Some thrived on it and others didn't, because they missed being with others, being in the same room, being face to face, sharing experiences, around the water cooler or the coffee machine or whatever. That stuff. How do people then cope with that effectively? And we're talking about the organisation that helps young people. So that became, for them now that they're coming out of it, they've got this push-pull. Some people still want to work from home, some people don't. It's the hybrid question, and they're saying, well, that's not really working for us. Where do we go from here? All right. My observations as well were very, very similar. Even internally with Cornerstone, I made the comment, we use technology not that much. The thinking sprint was born as a result of COVID. We wanted to put something back, so we had to learn how to be able to contact and talk to people and and keep that contact at a level that would make people interested. And so Thinking Sprint was developed.
Thanks, John. So, Michael, will you set us up for round 2, please?
I will.
We've looked at, so far we've looked at what you're observing currently, and we want to, when Michael sets this up, shift the focus a bit to the future. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, so what we've just done is answered a series of questions that look at take what we'll call an integral perspective. And this integral framework is based upon the work of Ken Wilber. So very quickly, what I want to do is take you through that model. Some of you have seen it before, so I won't spend too much time on it. But essentially what we're talking about is looking at the framework as a mechanism to be able to have a look at what goes on in our organisational life. So the vertical axis you'll see takes the view of the individual and the relationship of the individual with the collective down the bottom there. And on the left-hand side, or the horizontal axis, the left-hand side is the internal, the hearts and minds of both the individual and the collective, and the right-hand side is the external, those things that we can see, feel and touch, or the objective data that exists in organisational life. So when we put these two things together, what we get is the bottom right-hand quadrant, which is what we heard, I think it was from Rob Rowe, the strategy, structure, processes, operating technologies, and the market environment. Those things that we can see, feel and touch is the bottom right-hand quadrant. The bottom left-hand quadrant is around culture, which is what Kath and I spoke about, which is looking at the dynamics that exist in organisational life, which by definition are subjective. You can't actually see, feel and touch it, but you know it exists. And we talked about the extent to which over the last few years, these things have been impacted quite remarkably or markedly, particularly as we've gone from pre-COVID world to a post-COVID world. The top left quadrant is about individual perspectives, values, mindsets, worldviews, and the extent to which we have the words that we use as perspective, coherence. I'm a little bit tired, I think. Then the top right has got to do with capability and, as John said, the behaviour that we see around the organisation from an individual perspective. This has got to do with the skills, applied knowledge, practical experience, behaviour, and the quality of decision making. So these 4 quadrants help us look at what an organisation is doing. And of course, what it allows us to do is to actually develop interventions around the quadrants, recognising that one quadrant always impacts on another. So what we're trying to do, of course, is we're trying to get some sort of mastery. And as you can see here, we're trying to ensure that each of these quadrants are balanced in the way in which the organisation works. So let me see if I can get this to continue. So what we're going to do is to do round 2. And again, we're going to follow the same process, 4 minutes each, as John described before, using the thinking environment methodology. The questions are this time looking out into the future. And the higher order question says, how do we need to respond and adapt to these unrelenting VUCA conditions between now and 2025? So we're taking a 2-year view. So Robert Rowe and Kamari, your question is, how will organisations need to adapt and develop strategy, structure and processes in order to effectively navigate the disrupted conditions? Kath and I will talk about how will organisational culture need to evolve in order to ride the waves of these disruptive conditions. Michael and Catherine Hoekman, how will individual perspectives need to shift and be enhanced for people to find their way through these disruptive conditions? And finally, John and Christine, what skills, knowledge and behaviours will individuals need to develop in order to traverse these disruptive conditions? Okay, so Deb, do you want to put us back into those groups?
All good to go. So another 9 minutes, and make sure you get into it straight away. And we'll see you back here shortly.
Okay. Hi, Kath, we're back.
We are back.
So I'll start. I've had something came to mind when we were going through that, particularly about your favourite word, which is the woke word, because it's an interesting phenomenon that's taken place over the last 3 or 4 years about what's taken place. So my observation is, culturally speaking, there's a phenomenon called polarity management. You know about polarity management?
Well, no, probably nowhere near as much as I could or should, but I'm about to learn.
Well, polarities basically say you've got two ends of a continuum. You've got one end of a continuum, let's call political correctness, and the other continuum, political incorrectness. And of course, in organisational life, we certainly my time in organisations, there's been certainly one, let's say the 80s or the 70s, 80s, 90s, political correctness wasn't a thing. We said things and did things that when you think about it, you go, oh my God, how did we get away with that back then, right? And so, and of course, those of us, I'll put myself in this category, Kath, I don't know about you, but those of us that are certainly, let's say, over the age of 50, if not 55, if not 60, if not 65, that would be me. A lot of the je ne sais quoi of an organisational life is gone because you're so tense about what you can say. Now, here's what I think is going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. This push to political correctness, this push to, let's call it the woke culture, eventually, I think in the next 2 years, there's going to be a backlash against it. Because I'm seeing it even now, and what we see both in organisational life, particularly in organisational life, there's this sense that, oh my God, I can't say a word because I'm going to get canned for being, Deborah Pascoe will say it, male, stale, and pale, right? That's what she'll accuse me of being. Hang on a minute, that's not very fair. And then. But you know where I'm going with this? You get the sense of this?
It's not for me to talk about yet because you've got.
Sorry, yeah. That's right. Yeah, that's right. and so I think there's going to be a backlash because I think that the drivers of this woke culture, and don't get me wrong, I think that clearly there are things we used to do that were inappropriate back in the day. And I think by and large, those things are out of the system, right? But we've gone so far out to one side where even down to the point that I know that in one organisation, you can't say hit the back button on your computer to sign up for this because using the word hit is considered a microaggression, all this sort of stuff, right? So I think there's going to be a backlash. Now, whether that is a conscious backlash where organisations say enough is enough, or whether there'll be so much of a social cultural pushback, I'm not quite sure. But I certainly think, and there is a group of people that are driving this backlash. It's comedians. And they are usually on the fringe of a lot of this stuff, right? And they are on the fringe of pushing back against political correctness. And there's guys like Ricky Gervais and I don't know, a whole bunch of them. You go, how do you get away with some of that stuff? But they are pushing it back against it. And we are making a joke of it. It's become the social justice warrior stuff. It's becoming a joke. And I think, oh, okay, it's going to swing back the other way. And I think I've had it said enough.
Yeah, no, I think it's what you're presenting, I think, is absolutely spot on insofar as we have taken it and people take offence. People take offence wherever they are on the continuum. What I find fascinating is this whole, what I'm saying, does it impact me or is it hurting someone else? And you're spot on. Like comedians say it beautifully, they tend to be very self-reflective in their humour and making it okay, but is it okay for someone else to essentially repeat what they say? Yeah. And a whole grey area of confusion about what does it actually mean for an individual and how they manage. And culturally, obviously, when you've got an organisation that might be global, you've got an organisation that's made up of any of the, key areas that we kind of see as being minority groups, and then they become the majority. I think that it's really hard. I always say, generationally, how my dad thinks and speaks is completely appropriate for when he grew up. And then I don't feel it's appropriate to take offense to what he's saying. I would love him to evolve and understand it from a different perspective. But that's my generation that can do that. And if I put my kids in one room and my dad in another room, like they've got such different perspectives and views on things that I sit very much in the middle of the generation, saying it's really I always ask myself, what is the intent of what the person's saying? So my dad doesn't say it in a way that he's being critical. It's just his norm. And it's really hard to have an expectation that everyone will behave in a certain way. It's about managing expectations, I think. But I always ask myself, what is the intent? So he asks questions and explores things that are very foreign to him, but he tries to do it in a way that's not offensive. But the kids sometimes would see that as being offensive. But back to our question.
But what you've described is exactly that cultural difference and that cultural shift where we've got the balance is coming back, I think.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I just think that instead of seeing the differences and, using the word, but thinking about it as being woke, as other people being different, I really try to encourage us to see us as similar. So, and if we gravitate towards values as being how we define each other, more so than skin color or orientation or religion or anything else, heritage, then I think that if we start to unite people with similar values, then I think we have a much easier conversation, because then people become people and they don't become different.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, and I think that's what, I said earlier, I was in the role of leading ESOP Women for 2023, and it's really exciting because I've just got this amazing diverse group of women who represent 2 different countries, who represent generationally 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I'm not sure, we might even have someone in their 60s, who represents mothers, who represents carers, allies that are males, allies that are from the HR community, allies that are people. And it's just about, I suppose, finding a common purpose. So it's really finding that common purpose, appreciating the intent of what people are saying, and it not being said with in a malicious way to hurt people. We're in a curious way. Curiosity is always good, and it shouldn't be perceived as being bad. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. I got that.
Yeah. So that's how I really feel about where the culture needs to go, and I'm delighted that we've got in our organisation a culture that really promotes the employee resource groups who can really help bridge the gaps and just unite people rather than see a difference.
All right, we've all zoomed back in. So let's debrief this round, and then we'll have a final round where we're all together.
You want me to share the screen too?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, just to keep us focused on the questions. Thanks, Michael. So again, we'll start in the lower right quadrant, which, as Michael has said to you, is part of the integral framework and what we call Big S for systems. And so I think this time we're hearing back from Kamari. Off you go, 2 minutes.
Thank you. So Rob and I, in our own way, both agreed that change takes time. Change is difficult and change is challenging. And what has happened is that organisations have reverted back to traditional approaches insofar as hierarchies. And while hierarchies, we agreed, have their place, they cause their own issues. But to top that all off, structures need to change. We're in a very, very different environment at the moment, and we need to think about how structure in an organisation needs to work. And while we introduce new trends, the waterfalls, the agiles, whatever we want to call them, they all come from a basis that existed before. And so the thought bubble is that unless organisations do a stock take of what they have, where they want to go, how all this is going to work, eliminate, remove, archive, whatever you want to call it, things that haven't worked, but also utilise things that have, and build from there realistically, we're going to will remain in a loop. And just put different names or different badges on things that have previously existed. So it's all a matter of, you can't, throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you can't also remove people in their thousands when realistically that's all about tradition and meeting the bottom line. This is very different in the world that we live in and how things have happened, which have been out of our control, but at the same time, short-term pain for long-term gain. And the one thing I did hear this morning was somebody from the IT world talk about garbage in, garbage out. So a system, when I talk to organisations, I talk about you can have the best system in the world, but the content that you put in there that comes from your people, if it's not good, you will be spitting garbage out. You'll be spitting the same thing. So unless you stock take and look at and value, nothing's going to change. So that's kind of where we're at. So summary, do a stock take, look at what works, look at what doesn't, stop putting trendy names on things that are essentially interventions or solutions that have worked before. We just didn't give them a trendy name, and actually work with your people because they're the ones that hold up organisations.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kamari. Let's move around to culture. And I think, Michael, you're reporting back on behalf of you and Kat.
Yep. So there was a couple of things that I think became important when we talk about what's going to happen or what do we need to do by 2025. So one of the observations I made is that there's a polarity that we're managing at the moment. And one end of the polarity is this sort of the need, or organisations need to be politically correct. And at the other, which is sort of 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. And there's this whole sort of cultural zeitgeist exists in organisational life where people, there's a conversation of what I can say, what I can't say. And so there's sort of this restriction about, if I say that, will I get into trouble, the language and all that sort of stuff. Whereas at the other end of that polarity is what it was like in the mid-'80s, where you could say anything, do anything that clearly, when you think back, was clearly inappropriate. And so what I think is happening, I think I see it, is that there's a swing back away from this, and people are saying, geez, we're taking the fun out of being in an organisation because we're so tight, we're so restricted. So that's one thing I think I'm noticing when you talk to people, even when you listen to comedians talk about, what goes on in organisations, there's a push back away from this strong, let's call it, political correct culture. The other thing that I think, and this is what Kat spoke about, and she made the point that the generational differences has got to do with what is the intent, and you'll like this, Deb, what is the intent behind what people are saying? And is it malicious? Is it meant to hurt? Or is it just a difference between, let's say, what I might have said in the 80s or what my father certainly would have said in the 60s and the 70s, is there a malicious intent behind people who are, let's call it, of an older generation, using language that they were able to get away with in the 80s and the 70s and the 60s when compared to today? And Kat's point is there is no malicious intent. It's just a difference in language. And over time, we need to understand those differences in language. And that was about it. Oh, there was a bit more, but I'll do.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Let's move around to the pair that we're talking about, perspective. And I think, Catherine, you're feeding back on behalf of you and Michael.
Yeah, we started with a really fundamental principle. So Michael just made the point that we are social beings. If COVID taught us anything, sharing and learning together is our norm as humans. And so what form it takes in the future, it's just another form. But what form is it going to take when we're, you said the threat was removed, but there's a lack of maturity because we haven't developed the new system. Well, what does the campfire look like in, the future? It can't be left to chance. So we talked briefly about what we'd actually learned from COVID. Both of us had very positive recollections, if you like, of the collegial support that was evident in Zoom meetings. People were much more prepared to be vulnerable and accept vulnerability. So that was a plus that we should, retain, take into the new world. Communication was vital. Deficits in ability to communicate were highlighted and quite obvious, made more obvious. So clarity of purpose was constantly tested. It was, something that we really started to dig in and take much more seriously, so that we aligned the cause of the group around a good community contribution. We got briefly into AI having a massive impact, and the fact that something like that, which isn't accompanied by some ethical boundaries, is a big threat on the horizon. It can make all of the new world more efficient and effective, but if it's unethically handled, we've got something that we can't be complacent about in terms of its impact on this new world. We noticed that the organizations that gave people the opportunity to grow and thrive in COVID did better. The less hierarchical you were, the more you experienced the pluses that were coming through from people that were capable of dealing with VUCA. So we had to kick the nostalgia to the curb. Anyone who liked hierarchy is going to find it tricky going down this path. So that's kind of where we finished, really. Tell you more about Pizza Margarita when we have time.
Well, you'll all be on the same email when we send you out these the insights, so you can connect outside of this space. Thanks, Catherine. So lastly, let's hear from the pair that looked at capability, behaviours, what do we need to do to adapt? And I think Christine, you're feeding back on behalf of you and John.
Yeah, thank you. I think John and I, again, were quite aligned with, I guess, the skills, knowledge and behaviours that individuals would need from a capability perspective was all around collaboration. So it was all around making sure that leaders knew exactly what individual people needed so they were able to collaborate. And I think, we both, I think, in our funny kind of way, articulated that this is a massive job, this is big, and that we only really have a small window to get this right. And again, the language was different between John and I, but it was around reprogramming and also this emotional intelligence, that leaders needed to really tap into that emotional intelligence or that reprogramming to help their people collaborate and to really understand what they needed, what skills they needed, I guess, from a practical perspective, but also from that emotional intelligence to absolutely be able to, I guess, understand these disruptive conditions, but also be able to then work with their people to help them sort of actually lead from the front and be able to sort of understand what the needs are. So lots of discussions around collaboration, and I guess also, what was important to people so they were able to be able to collaborate and able to be able to lead. I think also there was lots of talk around
just what was important to people, like really kind of nutting down to them. And I guess because mental health was something that was so big over the last couple of years, it was just how do you sort of, lean into that as well and actually understand what the needs are. And just having those honest conversations and just, setting them up for success, making sure that all the skills, the training, the knowledge was all there so then people could be successful. And then I think we kind of touched on culture as well. Culture, do we need to rebrand culture? Is it, do people really understand what culture means today in the workforce? Do they really understand, the importance of behaviours and what that looks like? So lots of conversations. I think we both came at it in different ways with different language, but I think we kind of, ended up in the same place.
Thanks, Christine. And, this has happened throughout this sprint, and Christine just highlighted it, that as we talk through these big issues, even though we were asking you to focus on a particular quadrant of the integral framework, we can't help, because this is the way the world is, to, as we're thinking about capability, to talk about culture, and the impact that systems have on our capability and how our mindsets needs to shift and all that kind of stuff. So the idea of, having these discussions is that we do have an integrated discussion where we're talking about each of those quadrants and how they might, how might the dialogue converge to help us solve whatever problem we're trying to solve. Okay, so we're going to do a final round where we stay all together. We call this our freshest thinking round. And the words I'd like you to think about as we do this is that what we've done so far is, we've heard a number of different perspectives. Some of them are aligned, but some of them may be divergent, okay? What we're trying to do now is harvest your emergent thinking. So we've done divergent, some aligned. We now want to move on to what's your emergent thinking. So as a result of hearing everyone, not just what happened in your 2 breakouts, but as a result of hearing everyone's perspective in the room, what's your freshest thinking? What's emerged? Have you had an insight or not? Did you discover something? Has something particular resonated with you or struck a chord? So we're going to go, I'll ask for a volunteer to go first. This is about a 30 to 45 second grab. So we'll move around the circle fairly quickly. And again, if we were doing this in an organisation with, if you were doing this kind of thing with your team, what we would then be trying to do once we'd heard everyone's emergent thoughts is try to do some convergent thinking together. So what does this mean for us for whatever the project or problem is that we're trying to solve? So we've done divergent, we're now doing emergent, and we'll leave convergent for you guys after the sprint. Okay, so who'd like to go first? Thanks, Kath, I saw your hand. So we'll go clockwise around. So after Kath is Michael. Thank you.
Loved is the whole transformation from probably thinking about an organisation and the culture of an organisation to really needing to hone in on individuals and potentially groups of individuals to really try to provide them with a fabulous experience defined by their needs. And I think I really like the term that Christine used when she spoke about rebranding culture and really taking a step back and starting to think about what do groups of individuals need as opposed to one size fits all. And that's really my summation of where I came to at the end of this.
Terrific. Thanks, Kath. Michael, what have you discovered?
So I don't know who, it might have been Catherine Hopeman group and the commentary around technology. And then I think Catherine might have used the word AI, artificial intelligence. And that really struck a chord with me because I assume most of you have seen Jasper. I think it's Jasper AI, and I can't remember what the other one's called. And I go, wow, these things, this technology, this software, is you talk about disruptive. This is a real disruptor, huge disruptor, because the implications of putting a question or a topic in a piece of software and it's spitting out what you want it to say, boy, that changes the game totally.
Yeah.
That was what struck a chord with me.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. Catherine.
I was struck by that comment. She suddenly said the threat was removed, but we are lacking a maturity. And I think that's exactly where we're at. And I think I'm reflecting as a leader, most of the leaders that I work with are lacking maturity in the skills that are needed to manage flatter, more collaborative sort of structures. So, we can capitalize on this intergenerational, combination and mixing of learning and achieving better well-being. But it makes tremendous demands on leaders to have the maturity to manage a flatter, more collaborative, to kick that nostalgia to the curb about hierarchy and get with the flatter, more collaborative structures.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Michael Stillwell.
Sort of three things. I think my immediate thought this morning, listening to everyone, is what I'd term this need to accept diverse perspectives without being judgmental. That was really helpful. I think as individuals, we need to understand and accept what we can influence. It's fine to have an opinion on everything, but at the end of the day, there's only certain things. You're only human and you can only do so much. There's only certain things you can influence. And this came back to the pizza margarita comment, was keeping it simple, but doing the simple things really well. And out of that, I think, what is it that we need? What do we need to embrace? And that's for the passion. And then the final point was, and we spoke about media influences, is how do we overcome the disruptive influences on society through the media, both the mainstream media and the influence of ill-informed social media, potentially ill-informed.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you. Kamari. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Christine.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, is around this individual perspective. It's not one. It's not one thing fits all. I think we need to adapt it to the individual and really lean into this and listen to what their needs are. Also, this window of opportunity. We only have a small window to get this right, and I think that puts a little bit of pressure, but also some, I guess, immediacy on what we need to do to make sure that we prepare our people for, I guess it's resilience. Resilience was something that came to mind around disruptiveness and how we kind of prepare our people for resilience, because there is always going to be negativity. There's always going to be some sort of climatic disaster or things like that. So it's around resilience and collaboration and how we sort of all work together. But also, I think the emotional intelligence piece as well is, not underestimating that is so significant and important in being a leader today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Christine. Let's move around to John.
John,
you're on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry. The AI, I read an article this morning. I agree with Mike, being a disruptor. I read an article in The Age this morning talking about the Google and the Microsoft, and how the Google was asked a question, and I forget the name of it, Bard or something, and it gave the wrong answer. So as a disruptor, and how it could be used. The other one was the systems, when it was talked about garbage in, garbage out, which is a real old IT thing, but that struck me again as quite right. If we develop systems that don't allow people to work together collaboratively and don't give us the way forward, then we've got a problem. Stop yourself.
Thanks, John. Let's go to Kamari.
I think what I've taken away from here is that we all agree, regardless of which quadrant or question we answered, is that change is inevitable, and how we adapt and adjust to that and what we bring to the table needs to be looked at. The fact remains is that in order for people or organisations to accommodate, they need to value their people. Because regardless of AI or whatever trend is happening, AI has been developed by people. People have those ideas. So until we start valuing people and work with people, none of the new technologies, none of the new trends are going to happen, and they're not going to work, because we're eliminating the key resource that has created all of this technology and that has come up with that idea to create that technology. So it's great that AI is around, but without the person or the people who developed it, and without the people who have created the content in order to provide the correct answer, or the wrong answer for that matter, you're not going to go anywhere. So organisations need to start thinking about valuing their intellectual assets that are in human beings, in order for them to create a collaborative and better world. And not to say that hierarchies don't have a place, because there's some industries, professions, disciplines that need hierarchies, but in essence, it's about people.
Right, thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, let's hear from you, Rob.
So Michael, the one that's getting all the buzz in AI is ChatGPT.
That's it.
I put into ChatGPT, please explain Ken Wilber's integral theory in 4 chapters, and it did a fantastic job. Right? And then I was showing someone that, and I said, please write a sonnet in Shakespeare's style of something or other, and it did it. So, yeah, and I could go on. I listened to a podcast of a teacher in the US who uses ChatGPT to help her students, not just to plagiarize and all that sort of stuff. I think I got set up on this thinking sprint being in the bottom right quadrant, because Michael knows that's my hobby horses around structure and all that sort of stuff. And what I'm working on right now is how to explain why that's so important to get the other quadrants right. And all of you today was great input to help me in terms of what are you thinking about, what are you trying to do, all that sort of stuff. And my takeout from that is I've got a long way to go. So I've got a lot of work to do. And I really appreciate the conversations into that. Flatter, the comment about managers today can't handle Flatter, collaborative and all that sort of stuff, absolutely right. I've got ideas of why. I won't bore you with that today. And yeah, so it was just great listening to the conversation, and I just hope we can help push the world to a better place all together. So please, please, please keep going.
Thanks so much, Rob. We have to stay connected, don't we? So let me just say a couple of things to wrap up. What an incredible sprint. My head is just buzzing with all these different thoughts and connections. So thank you so much. You know, a couple of things that really stood out from me from what you've all said. You know, Kath, you were talking about at the start, you know, woke being your least favourite word. And then towards the end, talking about, you know, there's something that you picked up about rebranding culture. And we've been thinking about that. Like we used to say culture, we still do. Culture is what's the feel of the place, what's the smell of the place. It was kind of like located in a place. But where is culture now? It's not in a place. Because some work, you know, where is it? And where are the minds and the hearts? I really like Michael Stillwell, that margarita pizza analogy. I'm going to pinch that one. It's, you know, keep it simple, but do it really well. There's nothing better than a good margarita pizza in that context. And, you know, when you were talking about, I think you and Catherine were talking about like the reverse mentoring. I think that's a phrase Catherine uses, and you sort of picked up on that. And, you know, just on the weekend, on Saturday, I was talking with some of your children and their cousins around the Iroquois Native Indians, and how over generations they have this concept of both teaching and learning from previous generations and teaching and learning with future generations. So as a parent, I teach and I learn both from my kids and with my kids. Kamari, it was really interesting hearing you talking about, at one point you were talking about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and your whole thing around intellectual assets and how that's an intangible asset, but it needs to go somewhere on the balance sheet, doesn't it? Like it's absolutely so critical. And in the integral world, instead of, you know, the reframe of baby out with bathwater, as we talk about, you know, including and transcending. So taking the best from the past and transcending it into something better in the future. So I thought that was really interesting. You know, John and Rob, the whole thing around your systems focus, and it struck me again that we need systems to help us collaborate. It's not just going to happen on its own. And Michael Griffiths, you were talking about, you know, the polarity management. That's a fascinating area, as well as what's our intent. And it's usually good, noble, and worthy. You know, usually we don't wake up with an intent to be as, you know, as vile and obnoxious as possible. You know, this thing about that Catherine was speaking about, us being social beings, it's not only just because we are, it's been necessary to our survival. So we're hardwired for it. And I was so fascinated towards the end about the discussion about AI and ChatGPT. And I think what we need to do, Michael and John, is to have a whole sprint, putting AI in the middle and talking about it from an integral perspective, mindset, capability, culture, systems. Because, you know, we've said before that in terms of that bottom right quadrant, technology and systems have advanced at a faster rate than the upper left quadrant, which is our perspective and mindsets and our consciousness. And that's the problem, I think. So how do we get those two things to be closer in their trajectories rather than one being so far behind and one being so far ahead? Because collaborative capacity is one of the keys. It's not just nice to have, it's a must to have, as well as perspective coordination. And Christine, you talked about that, how collaboration is critical. And as you were talking, I sort of oscillated between hope and hopelessness, because I could feel, you know, we've only got a small window. And, you know, folk like us need to, you know, collaborate, stick together, learn from each other, teach each other, get oxygen from each other if we're going to traverse this wild, wild, wild world. So thank you all so much. It's been really, really inspirational and insightful. What we're going to do is we're going to put this recording on our YouTube, and we will also send you an email with just this last round of insights, so that but if you want to see the whole thing or most of the whole thing, it'll be on our YouTube, and we'll send you an email in the next few days with the link and with the insights. So thank you so much, people. You're all welcome back at any time. You're now part of our Sprinting alumni, so we will definitely stay in touch and be in touch. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye all.
You still there? See you, Kath.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I'd press leave.
We'll catch up soon, Kath.
Yeah, I popped a meeting in for a step.
Oh, fabulous. Good work.
23rd. Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Talk soon. See ya.
So, guys, I have to go because I got another 15-year-old kid I got to deal with who's been absent without leave for 2 days.
Okay.
I'll talk to you later. You
All
guys
right.
decide what you want to do, and I'll put this up once it does its thing. Okay.
Okay. Thanks,
See you.
Michael. See you.
Bye, mate.